Welcome to the Mullin It Over podcast with Reverend Jack Mullins and Austin Covey.
Hello, I'm Jack Mullins. I'm minister at Irving North Christian Church. And you are?
Austin Covey.
Austin Covey.
Office administrator at Irving North Christian Church?
Technology specialist. And
a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything.
Be lawnmower later today.
There you go. Okay, I have a hypothetical for you.
Okay.
The hypothetical is you're the chair of a search committee.
Okay.
And what a search committee does in our tradition is they gather resumes and they interview prospective ministers. So according to the resume you're looking at, you have the best candidate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this guy.
So we got you, is what you're saying.
No. This one is ordained, PhD, previously married. He's a widower. He served 5 churches, each with lengthy terms of service.
Okay.
Perfect candidate on paper.
For what?
Senior minister.
Okay.
About 6 months in,
Mm-hmm.
You discover that he does not have a PhD. There is no deceased wife. In fact, you speak to her on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
No record at 2 of the 5 churches, and he was run off from 2 of the other 3. Obviously, your committee did not do due diligence in regarding to checking this individual out.
Mm-hmm.
Now what do you do?
Sorry, I seem to have acquired a spider or a gnat or something. I know of a church where something similar happened with a youth minister.
Okay.
Had been presented that he was employed at another church. He was actually not employed at another church. He was employed at retail, and the previous church had terminated him. And they didn't do their due diligence, and they didn't find that out until quite a ways into his tenure. I mean, you can't fire volunteers, right? So
that's true.
I would have a debrief meeting with the search committee and maybe review what policies we had as to how the search committee is supposed to conduct search process. As an administrator, are you asking as personal opinion or as an administrator opinion?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one is going to shade the other, so.
Yes and no. As an administrator in our denomination, staff doesn't actually have a lot of power. Most decisions are made by congregational vote. So as an administrator, I might recommend we have an emergency board meeting.
Okay.
And present all of this information and see how they would like to handle that. In a business setting, I would say that's grounds for immediate termination. If you lie on an application, that's a good way to get fired. Mm-hmm. In our setting, unless the board decides to then send that to the congregation decides to do that, you can't do that.
Right.
So if they decide they just like the guy and he seems to be doing well, I guess he persists. I'm not sure that I'd be interested in working with him. I might look elsewhere for employment.
But if you were a lay member, you're a lay person, you're a member of the congregation, you chaired the committee.
I chaired the search committee?
Yeah.
I would like to think we would do our due diligence better than that.
Yep, but you did not.
Well, you don't get to say I chaired it and then you make up the grounds for how I chaired
it.
I said
it's a hypothetical. I get to construct the hypothetical.
Honestly, I would be embarrassed enough I'd probably leave the church.
Okay. When this happened, because this happened at my home church.
Okay.
After they had been under the leadership of a very, very competent, ethical, beloved senior minister for 33 years. Over a generation.
Yes.
And they went through this exact situation. And the chair of the search committee, lifetime member of the church as well, called the committee back together because when he began getting warning signs, he went back and did the work they should have done in the first place and found out everything that was going wrong.
Gotcha.
So they were, oddly enough, having a meeting of the nominating committee to identify new board officers, board chair, chair-elect, and so on. This individual with a supporter in tow barged into that meeting and said to them, "If you elect Jack Mullins Sr. as chair of this board, I quit."
So the minister barged in and said
The
that.
minister barged in.
Gotcha.
Because he saw the writing on the wall.
For the record, this is Jack Mullins Jr.
Junior. And
Let the record reflect.
and needless to say, that's the one and only time my father served as chair of a church board.
I would think that'd be a great blessing if he came in and did that, because he...
Yeah.
Well, and okay, so that is a interesting part of the hypothetical that was left out, is that this was probably 50 years ago.
Yeah.
I would say do we have a gnat in here? What is...
Yeah, but little friend,
Yes, where'd he go?
hanging off of your finger.
No, he's on my shirt now. All right, buddy. I'm pro spider, but not when you land on me. I was trying to get him to the floor. He didn't want to cooperate. Sorry.
But
We're anti-spider for the day.
I understand.
Anyway, sorry, the reason I ask is because the capacity to do the due diligence 50 years ago is a little different than the capacity to do the due diligence now.
It would be much easier today
Yes.
to do those things.
In the church that I'm aware of that had that problem with the youth minister, this was like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, this was at a time when, and maybe this is a harsh stance, in my opinion, there's not really an excuse to have that problem.
Well, and these were all business people, and they knew how to conduct a job search for for a staff person in their business.
Right.
They didn't even do the minimum of what would have been expected to run their own businesses.
Because, I mean, I would think, like, if somebody claims a PhD, you would at least like to see a copy of their diploma or something.
You would think.
Yes. I know it was a long time ago. They were still handing out diplomas then.
Yeah.
That's not a new invention.
But no, I just periodically I like to throw that hypothetical out to people just to see what their reaction is.
I think couching it in the time frame in which it happens does make a difference to a certain extent. Yeah, do your due diligence.
Yeah.
This is not a shot at any particular church or environment, but it is. I have found it to be relatively common in speaking with people who work at other churches or in doing contract work for other churches. A lot of things are gotten into by churches because due diligence was not done.
Yeah.
Whether it be contractual obligations for equipment or facilities or any number of other things.
Churches too often do not conduct their business in a professional way.
Yes.
And that's ludicrous to me, because in that regard, and I understand when people say, but the church is not a business. The body of Christ is not a business.
Correct.
But the function of the organization is.
Right. The operating structure.
The operating structure.
Yes.
And it has to be approached that way, in my opinion.
Well, and even the body of Christ, I guess it depends on what you want to ascribe to being church.
Yeah.
But even at an early church level, in the sense of tithing and giving money to the poor or the lesser, things like that. I mean, in a sense of money coming in, money going out, tracking that money, that sort of thing. I mean, that's even...
Somebody was still recording.
Yeah,
what was coming
I mean,
in.
that's like Jesus. One of Jesus' disciples is doing this job, right, for the 12.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a very, I would say, old part of church is. Even Jesus and his disciples had a business administrator to an extent, right?
Yeah.
So I think to a certain extent that's pretty key to making the operation happen.
And I understand that part of the challenge at the local congregational level is you're working with volunteers. Oftentimes, they may not have a business background or an accounting background, and they tend to believe in everyone's good nature, even when the people with whom they're dealing may not have very good nature.
Well, that's something else I would say is I think people in a church, and this is a generalization, but as a general rule, tend to be more moral, upstanding people. And sometimes they make the mistake that everybody else is also a moral, upstanding person. And so they don't do their due diligence because they think, oh, nobody would wrong a church, when in reality that makes you a prime target to be wronged. So all of the people with the intention of wronging somebody are going to go to the place where they have the greatest chance of success because they know there's not going to be a check.
Well, and that's why most churches have built into their governing documents a period of time someone has to be a member or participating member of that congregation before they can hold office and take various roles. Let us get to know you and learn how trustworthy you are. Same thing is even more true in working with children and youth, because churches, regrettably, can be a real feeding ground for pedophiles, because too often churches don't do their due diligence of background checks.
When I think what is true a lot of times, so I'll preface this by saying a lot of times in popular media, I guess you would say, the church that is portrayed is the mega church. And the reality is 99% of churches aren't mega churches.
That's right.
They're small churches. They're struggling churches. They don't have a lot of staff. They don't have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of resources. So, you see sort of in social media and different places, like, churches do this. Like, 0.05% of churches do that. The mega churches do that. But the reality is a lot of times churches are hurting for volunteers or they're hurting for help. And so when somebody comes along as a willing volunteer, they probably have somebody that's been doing it for 20 years and is burnt out and needs a break, and so they just go, hey, good, come on down, and that can be a problem.
And criminal background checks are not cheap. They don't come free, and every time you do one, it's going to run you anywhere from $50 to $100 or more, depending on what level. Church I served previously was right at the beginning of the movement to do that in churches. And I met with the board, I met with the elders, and I was able to convince them that all of them needed to have a background check run, whether they worked with children directly or not. And I told my elders, we need to know that all of our elders can interact one-on-one with any child without risk. And because this, in my opinion, is part of your ministry and service to the church. Every elder in that congregation agreed.
When I would say, even when people pass a background check, it is very common and I think appropriate to not have one-on-one.
Yeah.
One-on-one in visible space is one thing, but not to have isolated one-on-one interaction.
Exactly. Absolutely.
But, like Jack said, $50 to $100, and most people might think, well, $50 to $100 is not that much money. But when we talk about most churches aren't mega churches and most churches operate on a tighter budget, to most churches that $50 to $100, if you're talking about 10 board members, that's a lot. I mean, it moves the needle.
It will move the needle. So, but anyway, I just wanted to throw that at you to throw you a curve.
You got to wake me up a little bit. Keep me on my toes.
Wake you up, man. That's it.
Coffee hadn't done it yet, so we got to. I think that unfortunately, I think that situation probably happens more often than we're aware of. Probably because there's some embarrassment involved when that happens, so we probably try to bury that. But do your due diligence. If there's a contract, read the contract.
Yeah.
Don't Don't assume the contract is in your favor and sign it. Read the contract.
And make sure you have one. Make
Yes.
sure there is a letter of call. And that's true whether you're a congregation or clergy, because it will protect everyone.
Mm-hmm. When I even mean for equipment, for whatever, read the contract. And if you're not sure about the contract, it's worth the money to get an attorney.
Yeah.
To read the contract and make sure that you're squared away.
Yeah. Anyway, I remember one time a number of years ago, I had a young woman, grew up through the church, through youth group, and her mother was my secretary. Sweet young lady. And when she was about 28, her husband, who was an oil field worker, was coming home at the end of a week on site. On the way home, he had a traffic accident and was killed in the accident. She was devastated. She didn't know what she was going to do. She was out in Midland, Texas, alone by herself. Her world had come crashing down around her. All of her hopes and dreams were dashed. And she came to me, I don't know, 3 or 4 years later, kind of out of the blue, and told me about it. Of course, I knew, but this was the first time I'd spoken to her. And she said, "Am I wrong to blame God? How do I get over this? Is there something wrong with me? Why am I still angry with my husband? Why am I still angry? Why am I angry with God?" Have you ever run across a situation like that?
I have heard. I see that repeated. I think the undercurrent there is one that you do see a lot. That's, why does God let bad things happen to good people? That's a very. I'm reducing it down, but that's a very common sort of theme that you see, particularly from people who maybe aren't religious or who were and have left. I guess I would distinguish that between people there's a difference between people who are atheist and people who believe that God exists but are angry with God. Whereas an atheist doesn't believe in a God, right? That's the name. Atheist. Anywho, so I do think there's a lot of people who may identify as atheists. In reality is they believe there might be some God, but they're just not happy with it. Or they think, well, a good God could not allow these things, therefore there must not be a God.
Right.
Or God is not good, right? Or all good.
And I think you're exactly right. I think part of it is, years ago, a rabbi by the name of Harold Kushner wrote a book, "Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People?" And then parenthetically, "Why Do Good Things Happen to Bad People?"
Right.
And
people don't ever talk about that side of it.
No. And I think this young lady was coming from the perspective, I'm a good person. I've lived a good life, and I grew up in the church. What did I do for God to allow this to happen to me? And, we were at Chili's. We were eating lunch after church. And the first thing I said to her, first of all, I'm sorry, Steph. I'm sorry you've had to go through that. I've not lost anyone like that. My father died. I went through a lot of grief with that. Took a long time. I just gave her permission to be angry. I said, God is big enough to carry your anger. That's okay. You can be angry. It's natural to be angry at your husband.
That's one of the steps of...
That's one of the steps of grief.
Right.
And part of the trick is to not get trapped in that, but to allow yourself to move on without allowing anyone else to push you to move on.
Right.
Because I see that a lot. You ought to be over. You ought to be farther along. It's time for you to get over this. And I'm not advocating turning around and slapping them,
Might be tempted to.
but it's reasonable to be tempted because it is your pain, it is your grief. You live yourself through it at your rate, as long as you are continuing to progress.
That's what I liked what you said about live yourself through it. There are steps to the grieving process. It's fine it is fine and maybe necessary to experience all of them.
Yeah.
Don't get stuck on any of
And
them.
they are not sequential.
Yes. When there's no prescribed time frame to them.
That's right.
You could go through 6 of the steps real fast, and 7 could be,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that one takes a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. When my father died, he died after a lengthy illness with emphysema. And I guess 3 years after he had passed away, and he was in ICU at Baylor on a respirator. And I realized I was not able to visit anyone from the church that happened to be in the hospital on a respirator. I could not make myself do it.
Like a PTSD kind of a response.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I sat down with a clergy friend of mine, and he talked me through some of my guilt connected with my father's death. But he said, how long's it been? I said, it's been a while. He said, tell me about that first year. And I said, well, one thing I noticed was that every time there was an event, be it Christmas, whatever the event was, and I got on the other side of it, I kind of had a sense of relief because, okay, I made it through that one.
Right.
And at the end of the first year, I had gone through a complete cycle and survived it. And that's what I told her. I said, every time you go through one of these life events that y'all had always shared and you cannot any longer, embrace and celebrate your survival, that you got through it. And just because you get through it does not diminish the memories or the love, but it can soften the pain.
Right. And I think, to me, this question, too, ends up at kind of when we talk about why does God allow bad things to happen to good people, it's kind of an interesting thing because from a certain standpoint, I don't know that God is that heavily involved. As long as we are mortal, as long as we have self-determination, things are going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I think sometimes I'm certainly guilty of this. We kind of ride the line of, it's like if something good happens, it's like, man, I'm blessed. But then when something bad happens, I don't want to say, well, I got unblessed.
I'm cursed.
Yeah. So it's like when something bad happens, it's like, well, God doesn't pay that much attention. And then when something good happens, it's like God's blessing you. It's like, well, you pick one, you can't. I do think we tend to ride both sides of that fence a little bit. I certainly do.
And something that I think we don't like to think about when we do our own theology, and all theology is how we think about and talk about God. And we forget sometimes that there are moments in our existence when stuff happens. That's not the popular phrasing of that, but for this moment, stuff happens.
Yeah, insert other word, if you know
and
what I mean.
Be it natural disasters or anything else. That is the movement of existence and creation. Just like sometimes, like I said, good things happen. And what may be good for one person may be bad for another. My dad was in the hospital. Minister came in to see him. Now, my dad was not... This minister really, my dad liked him and appreciated him, but he wasn't his favorite minister. And his minister said at the end of the visit, well, Jack, can I have a prayer with you? And my dad looked up at him and said, yeah, I don't think so. Excuse me? You may not pray for what I think I need. What do you mean by that? Okay, Sunday, you prayed for rain. My dad was a home builder. On Monday, I was pouring a slab. I did not need it to rain. But you prayed for rain.
Mm-hmm.
Your prayer was in contradiction to what I needed.
Right.
So I'll pray for what I perceive I need.
Mm.
And you pray for what you perceive is needed. For example, my dad was silently and privately praying for a release from his illness in whatever form that took, be it physical healing or a terminal healing.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, he didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I got to get out of this situation one way or the other.
Well, I said that about, there's another situation that I know of. It's a guy that has a brain tumor, and I said I think it's harder on the family than it is on the person, because either you're going to be healed from treatment, or you're either going to find peace and healing from treatment, or you're going to find peace in death.
Yeah.
But the families, the family might find peace and healing, but if you pass, they don't have that same peace.
No.
Now they have, to a certain extent, chaos.
Exactly. And I was chatting with a friend recently who said, I'm prepared intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that is the best outcome for my loved one.
Mm-hmm.
But emotionally, I'm not there. I said, and you probably won't be until you truly go through grief.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever are.
No, you cannot prepare emotionally.
Ahead of time.
You
can recover, but I don't know that you can prepare for that.
Yeah, because you've not experienced the loss. You have anticipated the loss. But on the flip side, it's like having a child. You can plan for, you can get everything set up. You can anticipate the joy of having the child. But until you've experienced it, it's not real. And you really cannot anticipate what that moment is going to be like.
I think it's true for anything, though. It's like education on any topic, and I would say these are all becoming educated. Right? You are learning through experience. You can only learn so much through a classroom style. Like you can mentally prepare yourself for it, but it's a whole different thing when it's actually. You can read all the books. It's different when you're dealing with it.
Yeah, you can read every book on parenting you want to, but it still doesn't prepare you for the shock of when you have to change that first dirty diaper.
The first blowout.
Yeah. You can't prepare for that.
No, that's a learning experience.
Yeah. Unless you've worked in a feed lot, there's nothing to prepare you for that.
Daycare, maybe.
Yeah, daycare.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Back to the question, though, and I know we've kind of end laughing, and I don't mean to make light of the situation because it's not. I do think that's a place you have to get to mentally, though, where you just accept, maybe rightly or wrongly, I don't know, that life happens. I don't know that God is dialed into every moment of life happening. I think if God were dialed into every moment of life happening, we wouldn't have self-determination. So,
well, God can be dialed in without manipulating.
When I say dialed in, I mean I don't think it's a big chess game.
No, no.
And I think you have to get to that point, because if you believe that we have self-determination, then you have to also understand there are going to be consequences, positive and negative, to that self-determination.
Absolutely. And we sit here and we make these comments, understanding that there may be those listening and watching for whom their theology of God is, we are but chess pieces in God's chess game, and that God is directly involved and engaged in it all. And I understand that. I can appreciate it intellectually. I can't embrace it. That's not my personal theology.
Well, like I said a minute ago, I think it's easier to embrace that when positive things happen.
Yeah.
I think it's easier to say, well, I got, I've been blessed. God was looking out for me.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say sometimes it's hard not to say that if certain things. I used to have a professor in college. It was an environmental studies professor who would not say anything was true or false. He would say the preponderance of the evidence suggests.
Yeah.
And I think, things can break in your way one time or two times, and you say, oh, I got lucky. But things can break in your way a certain number of times to which you have to, nobody has to do anything, but I think it's fair and reasonable to say the preponderance of the evidence suggests there's something maybe greater than luck that has.
Yeah. And perhaps part of that might be you're living your life in such a way by virtue of your faith and opening yourself up to the direction of God that makes you in a position to be more inclined to experience positivities in your life. Now, one thing that this girl did, for whatever reason, she and her husband had put sperm on ice.
Mm-hmm.
And so after she had processed the loss for a couple of years and been through some counseling, she went down and had in vitro fertilization with his sperm.
Mm-hmm.
She was able to fulfill that part of their common dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And to have his baby and to raise their child.
Right.
And the little girl, she's a little doll.
Mm-hmm.
And I followed this young lady. And I think that was a major part of her healing. And it will allow her to move forward and to grow. As the little girl grows and she's able to open herself up to more and greater aspects of her life.
Well, in somewhat different vein, but I think similar concept, that reminds me of people who maybe wanted to go on a trip, or their loved one wanted to go visit a certain place, and they take their ashes and spread them there.
Sure.
Or things like, to a certain extent, I think, as far as like trying to fulfill those things together. Does that make sense? I think
absolutely.
Different vein, but similar concept, I think.
Absolutely.
What you said a minute ago about as far as living your life in such a way to open yourself up to
positive events in your life.
Right. The sort of, I guess you could say maybe the call of God or what. I heard Dr. Tony Evans, pastor at Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, say one time that God's direction for your life can be like a GPS. The GPS doesn't force you to go anywhere. You can go wherever you want to. That doesn't mean it's not pointing you to, if you follow the GPS, you're going to end up at a destination. You don't have to follow the GPS. You can go wherever you want.
That's right.
And sometimes you might not go the path of least resistance. And what does the GPS say? It says recalculating, and it comes up with a new path. So just because you didn't take the path of least resistance doesn't mean you're not going to end up at the same final destination.
Yeah. And I swear there's one GPS program you can download that when I turn a direction other than the one she wants me to take, I swear it sounds like she's yelling at me, I told you to turn left.
Probably. Is it the British lady? They're always British. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I thought that was, if you think of life, if that is sort of how your theology and spirituality works, I think that's an interesting illustration in the sense that there might be a direction that you can go to a place that is most fulfilling to you. If you want to say that's your call, it's the place maybe where you find the most peace and fulfillment in life. But you can go wherever you want to go.
That's right.
There's no, it's not, there aren't any bumper lanes on the bowling alley, Right. You can go wherever. There's nothing to force you to go down this path. It just might be where you find the most peace.
And learn from your experiences and mistakes and try not to repeat them.
Yeah.
It's like the couple of whom I'm aware, they came to a minister. They didn't know this person. Came to him and said, we've been to every minister in town. We want to get married. When we tell them I've been married 4 times. She's been married 3. They won't touch us. They won't deal with us. What should we do? What can we do? He said, counseling. Let me say it again. Counseling.
Yes, slow down would be
Third
my first
time, counseling.
Yeah.
Find out what went wrong in your previous relationships. Are you selecting the same kind of partner? Are you, for example, not saying this couple did it, are you identifying people who may be alcoholic and you think you can change them or save them?
Are you a fixer?
Are you a fixer?
Don't be a fixer.
That doesn't work.
No. No disrespect to the people who think they are fixers. I've been at that point in my life. You may have too. I think lots of people go through that phase. And hopefully at some point you realize you cannot save the world, and all you're going to do is kill yourself trying.
Yeah. And, but, look at how you can adjust your thinking of yourself and the world around you. What do you and your partner need to do to create the healthiest relationship together you can do? And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. But you have learned that between 7 marriages combined, whatever you've been doing ain't working.
Yeah, you've learned what doesn't work.
So quantify that, identify that, and avoid it.
When something I sort of jokingly say to people is learn from your mistakes, but try to learn from other people's too.
Well, and that's hard to do.
If you learn from somebody else's, you don't have to make that one. You can make a different one.
That's right.
You will make some.
Yeah.
But try not to make the same one.
It is hard to extrapolate from the mistakes of other people to my own behaviors. Although we learn, hopefully, as little babies, first of all, we have to learn what the word hot means. And we can only do that by experience. So at one point, we have to burn ourselves.
Yes.
But after that, mama or daddy can go, hot, don't touch. And you go, oh, I know what hot is, and that's not fun. I'm not going to touch that.
I'm not going to mess with that.
And when we get older, we forget that we kind of learn that same way all through our lives. Or we need to learn. And we don't always. You're how old? 33?
Yes, I had to think about it. They all kind of run together at some point.
Tell me about it. I can guess that I would assume that you've had to deal with loss, death of friends or family. How do you do that? See, this time around, I'm throwing you under the bus on occasion.
I don't know that you're throwing me under the bus. I would say I have not dealt with the loss of anybody in my immediate circle.
Okay.
So dealing with that is a little different. It is easier, I think, to rationalize and land on that when it's somebody who's not immediately close to you. It's like you talked about earlier, like I'm mentally prepared for it, but I'm not emotionally prepared for it.
Yeah.
When it's not somebody that you have an immense emotional attachment to, it's easier to lean on that rational preparedness. Like we're all going to go and of the people who I know who have died, that particularly the ones actually, I can't think of any, I don't want to say that weren't their fault, but I mean, either they were older people who had lived a good life and that was...
They just hit the end.
Yes. Like my great aunt passed and I was close to my great aunt. She and I had a good relationship. And when she was, I think she died at 98. When I saw her when she was 97, I said, oh, man, you're almost at 100. I hope you make it to 100. And she said, oh, I hope not. She was...
She was done.
Yeah, she was done. And she was still very there mentally. Physically, she had started failing. And she was there mentally and knew she was failing physically. And she was frustrated and she hurt and she was tired.
Yeah.
And so I think it's easy to make peace with it when the person who passed is saying, hey, I'm good to go,
Right.
Most of the younger people that I know who have passed as a result of behavior they were engaged in.
Yeah.
I'm not morally judging them, but if you are involved in certain kinds of activities, unfortunately, one of the side effects of those activities, or potential side effects, is you can die.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's heartbreaking, and it is such a waste when someone does that. But what destroys me mentally and emotionally is when that kind of attitude and behavior affects others, or is detrimental to the existence of others around you.
what do you mean?
The worst grief situation with which I ever had to deal in the ministry involved a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. They were in the care of a grandmother who was a known Valium addict.
Oh, so you're talking about when that person's behavior negatively affects or results in the death of somebody. Okay,
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, like if you're the drunk driver and you kill somebody else,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. Yeah.
And she was asleep middle of the afternoon, and the 2-year-old and the 3-year-old went out and down the alley, went in the backyard of a house a couple of doors down, and fell into an unattended swimming pool. By the time they realized they were gone and got the paramedics, they were able to revive them, but only on life support. When the babies were born, the mother was 16 and the father was 19. And so when the babies were injured or died, the mother was only 19.
So you kind of had babies having babies.
You had babies having babies. And they asked me to go in. The youngest had already died. They asked me to go into the ICU with the older one as they removed life support because the parents, they couldn't handle it. And I stood by that baby's bed until her last breath. And, you know, you can intellectually and professionally detach and isolate and protect yourself. Beautiful little 3-year-old blonde-headed baby girl. And in a moment, I flashed on my daughter's image as a 3-year-old. And that hooked me, and I couldn't get out of that. And the pain of that nearly ran me out of the ministry.
Well, that was, I would say, you know, they say right place, right time. That was wrong place, wrong time because of a number of factors, but you had a child that was that same, you know.
And I run into the grandmother in question was the grandmother of the mother of the children. I run into the mother and dad of the father periodically. They moved to my hometown and joined my home church, so I encountered them on occasion. From their perspective, I was the right person in the right place at the right time.
I just meant for you.
For me,
Yeah.
It absolutely was wrong.
Well, you know, I have some friends who served in the military, and something that I've heard pretty consistently from people in that occupation or former occupation that I've talked to is that's one of the things that they struggle most with PTSD is not the things that happen when you engage with other people who willingly engage in war. It's the, you know, all of the things that come with that. It's the civilians who happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
What they refer to collateral
damage.
Yeah.
Civilian casualties. You know, most of them, because it is easier to rationalize what is happening between you and
Yeah.
You know, if I'm shooting at you and you're shooting at me, it's easier for me to rationalize what's happening.
Yeah.
If you're a kid who's out there playing soccer and happens to step on an IED, that's a different.
That's right.
You know.
As soon as you become an identity, a person.
Well,
to me.
yeah, I wouldn't say that, though. I mean, it is one thing when we have both chosen to engage in this activity versus somebody else who's been sucked into this activity outside of their own.
Right.
You know, in the instance of the Valium addict, if you and I both take a Valium and we get in a car and go somewhere,
Yeah.
we have both willingly engaged, and we wrap ourselves around a tree. Okay, we both engaged in that activity.
Yeah. And
You know.
it's tragic, it's wasteful, sinful, if you will. But if it's between you and the tree, that's one thing.
Right.
But if you wrap yourself around that tree and there's a kid in between you and the tree,
Yeah.
then it takes on a whole different level.
Yep. And it's hard for me to articulate my opinions on those situations without becoming judgmental is not the right word, but just harsh.
Yeah.
You know, as adults, that is something I said I found as I get older, I lose patience with adults. As I become more of an adult, I lose patience with adults. And I started to become concerned that I was just losing patience in general. I used to work with kids more. And I went back to do some stuff working with kids. And what I found is I still have a lot of patience with kids. I have no patience with adults.
I understand that.
You know, but as adults, we have an obligation to protect the children.
Yeah. Adults should know better. Kids, they're still learning.
Yeah. And so when I used to be a high school football coach, and I used to say, you know, as a coach, you understand you're going to get moments of brilliance and moments of bonehead. You just hope the moments of brilliance outweigh the moments of bonehead, right? Like sometimes they're going to do things and you're like, holy cow, I didn't think that was going to happen. And then sometimes you're going to do things and you're like, holy cow, I don't know what just happened, you know?
Yeah.
But kids are supposed to do that, you know? And obviously as adults, we're still learning too. That's a mistake, I think. As a younger person, a mistake you make is thinking the adults have it all figured out.
Yeah.
They don't.
No, not at all.
But as adults, there needs to be some level of filter and understanding, you know, second or third order thinking of what are my decisions doing and how are they going to impact those around me.
Yeah.
Kids, I don't necessarily expect that. I think that's a developed trait.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on the age of the kid. I mean, if you're 18, figure it out, you know, but if you're 6,
Yeah.
you don't have that processing yet. But as an adult, you need to figure it out.
Yeah. One thing that has always concerned me is what I perceive as the sloppy theology of death.
Mm-hmm.
When people say, and I heard it as people were talking to this couple, well, God needed your baby in heaven. And to me, that is the most profane statement. Why does God need that baby? God doesn't need that baby. You're just trying to make excuses. Now, and all of that language, no matter the age of the person, and I came to a theology of death that God does not take. God is not an Indian giver. God does not give you someone to love and then suddenly arbitrarily jerk them away from you. That's death. And death is part of life. That's the end of a life cycle, whether it's by accident or illness or simply age. God doesn't take, but God receives. And God received the spirit of that child. God received the spirit of your spouse, of your grandmother, of your aunt. God is not a taker, but God is a receiver.
When I try not to be heavily critical of other people's theologies because everybody kind of comes to things on their own. But that is one that has always bothered me and will continue to bother me, and I will be critical of, is the that sort of term, God needed another angel or something like that. I guess if it works for you and it makes you feel better, then whatever. I don't buy that.
No.
We are imperfect. We are mortal, and in that status, we will eventually die. And that's just, like you said, it is what it is.
I had someone respond to that God needed another angel, and their response to me privately was, isn't God powerful enough to create another angel without taking my loved one?
Yes.
Yes.
It's just, yeah. I don't like criticizing other folks' theology or trying
Well,
to...
you can criticize theology without being critical of the person.
Well, I try not to criticize their theology because I don't know what life experiences led them to that place.
Yeah.
You know, everybody ends up at a different place, you know, or maybe not everybody, but, you know, people should think through their own theology and figure out what works for them, and I don't try to be critical of that typically. But that's one I think that's one I'm going to be a little critical of.
Because to me, it can
that.
be so very destructive.
Yeah.
And destructive of a person's faith.
Yes. Well, and it can, in my opinion, pit them in in their minds, pit them against God.
Put them in an adversarial
Yes.
relationship. Yeah, it's kind of like going back to that book. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? That's life.
Yeah.
That's the way life runs. And some days it's all roses, and other days you're slogging through the swamp.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we live life, and we maximize the positives that we can, and we try to minimize the negatives. And it ain't easy.
No. But it's do your best.
Do your best. Give due diligence to the living of life.
Amen to that.
Here's another hypothetical. And I'm going to ask you, do you embrace it or run?
Okay.
Do you U-Haul, bring it in, or do you ghost, ignore it and make it go away?
Okay.
You start attending a new church. You have joined the church, and the church sends their welcoming committee with your welcome basket.
Okay.
In the welcome basket are some trinkets and your pledge card, and they will help you evaluate your income to evaluate what your pledge should be. In that visit,
Yeah.
do you embrace them or do you run?
I will preface this by saying I tend to be slow. It is a known fault of mine. I tend to be a little slow on the commitment phase for things like that, and I tend to be an over-researcher. So I probably would have found out this was coming before I joined the church and not joined the church. Do your due diligence. Yeah, I wouldn't run in the sense that I would ghost them. I would intentionally let them know why I was leaving. You know, I don't think ghosting solves any problems because if you left, there was a reason you left. And you can't expect a person or an organization to change if you don't let them know why you left. So I think you should let them know why you're leaving. But I would certainly let them know, and so I'll see you later. You know, I mean, there's a lot biblically to tithing. I don't think there's a lot biblically to tithing a church prescribed amount or to the church even necessarily, right? Like you were tithing unto God, not unto a organizational structure. And so how you choose to do that, whether it be through another nonprofit or personally donating to people on the street or whatever your method of doing that is, I don't think it's anybody else's business.
Now, my hypotheticals come from real life experience or knowledge.
I assumed.
And the people who told me that story, and I asked them, what'd you do? We let them finish their spiel. We told them we'd get with them later. We sent a letter to the church outlining why we felt we had made a mistake, and that was part of it. And we thanked them for their hospitality, and we separated ourselves from that group.
That's probably what I would have done.
Yeah.
I think, and this is, I think, true for our denomination. A lot of things, whether it be prayer or whatever, are really between you and God, not between you and clergy or you and the church structure or whatever. We don't tend to place other people or organizations between us and God.
There was a movement at one time, it never caught on, thankfully, where there was some clergy that were moving around from church to church, or changing churches. And they, part of the requirement was their ministry team went with them. They had their own worship leader, their own music leader, their associate minister. Basically, if you hire me, you hired them. It's a package deal. And everyone that you've had, you have to let go.
I have seen that happen, not in that the new minister had a prescribed team they brought in, but that the new minister effectively terminated or
Had
required
right of termination.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. I think that was part of the deal. Was if you hire me, you clear out all these other people, and I'm going to bring in who I want.
Yeah.
I don't know. The who that person wanted had not all come from the previous church.
Sure.
But they were all people that he had previous knowledge from.
Sure.
Now, I do have a background in coaching, and that is actually a very common practice. So, to a certain extent, I kind of understand that.
Yeah.
I think it's unfair to a certain extent, but I've lost my job to a head coaching change that I didn't have anything to do with, so I can understand it.
And it used to be part of the culture of transition. If a new minister came into a church, it was just accepted practice that the professional and the upper administrative staff would submit their resignations, and the incoming minister would have, say, 6 months to either accept or reject it. And
so they could choose to keep?
They could choose to keep, or they could choose to dismiss. I've been in some situations where retroactively I wish I'd had that option.
I was going to say, you probably wish you'd had that option a couple times.
But that's normal. It sure is.
It can certainly be damaging to the other, particularly if those people have families, though.
Sure.
Expecting them to, particularly if your church as a career, whether it be ministry or administration, and you are interested in staying in that vein, there may not be another, depending on where you live.
Yeah.
There may not be another option immediately available.
Exactly, and there's always a transient element to the ministry or any church vocation. Music people, usually they can manage to stay within a community. Certain administrative types can, because when one domino falls, well, there's another going to fall because somebody's going to take their place. So you just play musical chairs. Doesn't work so much with clergy, especially of smaller denominations.
In coaching, they call that the coaching carousel.
Exactly. Exactly. I've got a question for you. In working with small congregations, and by small, I'm going to define that as below 100.
Okay.
These congregations, in my observation and experience, tend to be struggling numerically and financially.
By numerically, you mean membership-wise?
Membership-wise. Tend to see, I think, a lot of them still in buildings that accommodated congregations of 300 or more. So the overhead is killing them. And they want to maintain some level of programming.
Mm-hmm.
A question that they often have is, as they transition from a viable congregation to something perhaps a little bit less than viable,
Mm-hmm.
how do they maintain effective ministry on a very tight shoestring budget? How can you, how can you provide minimal contact through multimedia effectively?
So those are two very different questions.
Okay.
How do you
Pick one.
How do you function on a shoestring budget, and how do you provide minimal contact through social media? Are very
Okay,
different.
take the first one.
I would start by saying their budget is impacted by two things, right? And I'm going to use terms that are more business related than nonprofit related just for clarity. And I understand that nonprofit terminology, particularly church terminology, is sometimes different. And sometimes church people, I've had pastors in the past kind of bristle when I use more business oriented terms. But I think they're more universally understood. And so I think when you're speaking in a context like this, for people to understand it, using those terms make it more universally understandable, if that makes sense. So budget is really two things, right? There's income and there's expenditure. I do think, like you said, it's very common for a lot of churches in our denomination, similar denominations, to be in that position of we were big once and we had a large facility when we were big once, and now we have shrunk, but we're still in the big building. And personally, I'm a fan of keeping the big building if you can afford it, because paid for property is better than unpaid for property, and a big building is in a lot of ways more beneficial than a smaller building. I'm not going to say it's universally better, but it can have its advantages. And acquiring another big building is hard and very expensive. So I think you do have to get a little bit creative with your income aspect. You need to be careful in not doing something that's going to cost you your tax-free status. Mm-hmm. So for any of you out there, if you have ideas are good. I would run those by either a CPA or a tax attorney to make sure you're not putting yourself in jeopardy. But becoming a little bit more creative in hosting events, be like concerts or different things like that. You can take up love offerings, hosting community organizations that will pay you a love offering, et cetera, et cetera. Get, your biggest asset is your building, and I do think the days of churches only being occupied one day a week, effectively outside of office staff, are kind of over. It doesn't make sense to try to float a building on donations when you're occupying it one day a week. So try to keep it as busy as you can. From an expense standpoint, trim the fat. A lot of churches have a lot of fat. And maybe that's not a proper term for people these days. People get sensitive about their weight or whatever. I don't mean it in that capacity, obviously. But it can be very easy to be overspending on things, whether it be, internet bills always go up. So sometimes maybe look at another provider, see if you change providers, if you can get your bill suppressed. I don't know if this is the kind of stuff you were asking about.
Sure.
But,
and I think you're exactly right. How do you trim those expenses? Stay on top of them and continue to seek out a better deal.
Yes.
On everything you can.
Yes.
Take advantage of that tax-free status.
Well, and understand that a lot of companies, Microsoft, for example, Google, offer services that would normally be paid for services. They offer them for free for nonprofits. So you can get Microsoft Office, the whole Office suite, for free as a nonprofit if you register through Microsoft. You can get Google Workspace, Google Drive, Google Docs, all that kind of thing for free through Google as a nonprofit. So you might be paying for software. I mean, we were when we got here. We were paying for licenses for software that we didn't have to pay licenses for, or that we could get cheaper licenses for. Check TechSoup. We don't have anything through them currently because it was actually a better deal to go through Microsoft directly than it was to go through TechSoup. And then Sales Shop. You know, when you and I were together at our previous church, and we did the live streaming setup at the beginning of COVID, we built the entire live streaming setup, a new soundboard, computer, cameras, tripods, cabling, the whole shebang for less than $5,000. I think quite a bit less than $5,000. I understand we were fortunate that we had the ability to build the computers and everything ourselves. We didn't buy an off-the-shelf computer. We built a computer. I understand not everybody has the capacity to do that, but it is pretty common for places to put stuff on sale, particularly Black Friday, holiday season kind of stuff. And a lot of times, people go to Best Buy or Newegg or Amazon or whatever. You can have a lot of success checking manufacturer websites, so HP, Dell, Lenovo, whoever, and sometimes they will have better deals directly on their website than you can get through a third-party retailer.
You make a good point. I think churches forget we are a nonprofit organization.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think of ourselves in that way. We tend to think of ourselves as the church.
Right.
So we ignore the solutions out there for nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we are, and we need to, I think, learn how to fund certain aspects of our ministries via grants and grant writing. I've been involved at churches who have champagne tastes on a beer budget, but they've never outgrown it.
Yes.
And so they are used to doing everything in the best way possible because they are trying to maintain appearances.
Mm-hmm.
Appearances don't mean a thing if you have to lock that door for the last time.
When that's something, the saying that I use a lot when I'm talking to people is, you don't need a Lamborghini to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Understand what you're trying to accomplish and what you actually need to accomplish that. And like Jack said, grant writing, there are a lot of resources online now that maybe 10 or 20 years ago weren't there. Now there are a lot of things like ChatGPT, which can actually help you generate the grant writing proposal for you, right? Mm-hmm. Like leveraging some of the technology that's available now that even 5 years ago wasn't available.
Yeah.
And having some level of competency in doing, we talked earlier about doing your due diligence. Nobody has to be an expert in everything, but do some due diligence. Like I know of a church that bought a local network server, like a storage server, and they spent like $14,000 or $16,000 on the server. And I pulled it up it was a Dell rack mount unit, and the brand new unit from Dell's like $2,200. So I don't know, and it's like I don't know what all they had included in that.
Where'd the other $10,000 go?
Basically, it's like the other $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 just kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, where'd that go? And really, was that necessary for what they were doing?
Yeah.
You can buy, if you do need networking equipment, you can buy refurbished networking equipment. There are entire companies, and all they do is buy networking equipment from major companies, refurbish it, and then resell it.
Yeah.
And it's good stuff. I have a refurbished server that I bought 10 years ago, and it was used when I bought it, and it still runs. I crank it up every day, and it still runs.
Yeah.
So don't overbuy. It's very easy to do that. There are certain companies that have a reputation for doing this. They sort of tier their things in such a way where it's like, for only $50 more, you get this next thing with more bells and whistles, and then for only $50 more, you get this next thing. And so when you started out, you were going to spend like $600. Next thing you know, you're spending $2,000.
Yeah.
Because you just like.
It's not exactly bait and switch, but it's pretty close.
Right. They just make the tiers just close enough that you go, oh, well, I only, if they were $200, you'd go, it's not worth it, right?
Yeah.
But it's just close enough that you go, for only $50 more, I can get this next thing.
Yeah. But it won't work right unless you buy this other component for another $50.
That's not, that happens too. This is a little different. I'm not going to call it. There's a specific company that is famous for doing this. I won't call them out, but it's like tablet such and such, this amount of money.
Yeah.
Double the storage, this extra amount of money. This other newer, better thing, slightly more money.
Yeah.
This other better thing with slightly more storage. And next thing you know,
Yeah.
you're 2.5 times as much as you originally intended to spend because you kind of nickel and dimed yourself up.
Yeah.
But that is true too. People, I've seen people sell dedicated streaming boxes, and it's an Intel Nook, that you can buy off the shelf, and they're selling it for 4 times the price because it's a dedicated streaming box. It's not. It's just a mini PC. There's
Yeah.
nothing remarkable about it.
Yeah. I've been involved. One of the largest, used to be the largest DOC, Disciples of Christ congregation in the nation, and they were still living under the mentality, we're not going to get our hands dirty.
Mm-hmm.
And what had happened, the facility had grown beyond their capability to get their hands dirty. So now they had to hire everything done. And then I served a congregation, and they did everything themselves with the exception perhaps of HVAC, heating, air conditioning. And they could do anything. And they took advantage of their internal resources and talent pool. And I think that's one way you keep your church operating at peak efficiency on that shoestring budget. Austin and I built a sound booth, and the building in which we are located has had some creative contracting in the past, and squareness is not necessarily a concept that was often used in terms of walls and angles, with the exception of the sound booth we put up. Neither of us are professional carpenters, but we were methodical. We took care of making sure we did it as right as possible. We did it ourselves and saved probably $2,000, $2,500 in labor costs. Material would have been more because the contractor would have bought the materials and added 25% to the expense of the materials.
There would have been some kind of markup. I'll take your word on what the markup would have been, but
and that's one way churches can operate on those shoestring budgets is do as much as you efficiently and effectively can. Now, there are some things it's just not practical.
Don't do electrical. Unless you have a certified electrician, don't do electrical.
Yeah, and probably stay away from the plumbing.
Yes.
I mean, you can get away with it sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, with the electrical, one, it's a fire hazard. Two, your insurance may not cover it because you're not a licensed electrician. So if you have a licensed electrician at the church, that's great. If you don't,
hire one.
Not worth it. Yeah, hire one.
Because you can kill somebody messing with electrical that you don't know what you're doing.
That, or even if you know what you're doing, if you burn the church down and it wasn't done by a licensed electrician, you're not going to have any insurance coverage. There's too many headaches with that. Don't do that.
Yeah.
just don't.
Don't fall into the trap of false economy.
Yeah.
And
one of the things that I would reference too is, like, again, when we're talking about understand your needs. A lot of churches still carry huge copy machines, and almost nobody owns those. They're almost always a lease. Most churches don't need a copy machine that can print 100,000 pages a month or whatever, some mega $30,000 copy machine. And that's, if you look at how much they cost, that's how much they cost if you buy them outright. I know churches who are paying $600, $700, $800 a month for a copy machine lease, and they print 100 bulletins a week. And it doesn't, you can buy an off-the-shelf copy machine that uses toner, not an ink one, but an actual toner copy machine for $600 or $700, which is a lot of money up front. But these other folks are paying that every month, So yeah, I mean the $600 or $700 one prints 20 pages a minute instead of 40 pages a minute or whatever. I don't know copy machine specs off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
But if you're only printing 100 bulletins, do you need to pay $10,000 a year for a copy machine? Probably not.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff adds up over time and can eat your lunch. And those contracts are really hard to get out of.
And another money pit are church vans.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of churches have gotten out of the van ownership because the insurance is prohibitive. The cost of the van, unless you can buy it outright, you're paying monthly payments. And it's really cheaper if you're going to carry 10 kids somewhere over the weekend. Go to Enterprise, rent a van for the weekend. You do that 4 times a year is a lot cheaper than paying for 1 year round.
And that's something, like when you say if you do it 4 times a year, before you do anything, cost it out. The way that I tend to cost things, equipment or whatever we buy, is over the warranty of the item. Because if it breaks during the warranty, you can usually get it fixed or replaced. If it breaks outside of the warranty, you're going to have to buy it again. So just assume you're going to have to buy a new one every time the warranty runs out. And kind of figure out your costing. How much is this going to cost us, or how much is this going to save us over that time period? And then does it make sense?
Yeah. You mentioned a $600 copier.
Mm-hmm.
What's the warranty on those normally? 3 years?
I don't want to say normally. Ours is 3 years.
3 years.
It could be 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. Just you would have to check that, but ours is 3 years.
So you figured $600 over 3 years. That's $200 a year.
Right.
That's pretty darn cheap. I mean, you can't lease one.
No, you're going to spend minimally that much a month on a lease. So,
I think part of the difficulty in churches operating efficiently is being honest with themselves about their situation. Because that's painful, that hurts. Churches especially, I think, we tend to live in the past.
Well, and I think this is true. I've seen this in small businesses, even in big businesses and churches, whatever, that I've worked with. Like our copy machine doesn't fold the bulletins. We have to fold them manually. And, it's very easy to say, well, we need this better one because it folds them for us. Okay, again, you fold 100 of them a week. You're going to pay, instead of $700 one time, you're going to pay $700 a month for 5 years.
And for 100 bulletins.
For 100 bulletins that it folds a week. How long does it take you, or, do you have a volunteer? If your paid staff's folding them, how long does it take to fold them? How much are they paid per hour? Okay, how much does it cost you to fold those bulletins versus how much does it cost you to buy the machine that folds the bulletins?
And you touched on, I think, a very salient point is volunteers. A lot of people are more than willing to come in and perform an act of service for the church. Old or young, folding a bulletin is not rocket science.
No.
And if it's someone that has trouble lining it up, you can get a paper cutter and show them how to run it up against the guide, and that will help them.
You can actually get a paper folder. You can get a manual folder where you put them in and it folds them. You just pull the lever.
Not if you've ever had one before.
Oh, I haven't. Not that good?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'd rather train a volunteer.
That's fair. But, a lot of people try to gear themselves up or accommodate for, we'll use the term peak traffic.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to be able to print these bulletins on Sunday morning, and we want to be able to print 200 of them like that. Okay, well, if you start printing on Thursday, you don't need them to be able to print like, super fast. So, plan to the average, not to the peak, I guess, if that makes sense. If you buy everything so that it functions, everything runs right at peak time, when peak time is for 2 hours on a Sunday morning, you've overspent on a lot of your stuff that doesn't get used the other 6 days a week.
Well, and part of that is if you push everything till the last minute, the odds of the whole system getting jammed up at that last minute increase, in my opinion.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is if you buy everything so that you have a greater chance of not having a bottleneck there. So you have built your entire setup around not bottlenecking in the one time you may leverage it to its peak capacity.
Yeah.
When the rest of the time you're not leveraging it at all.
And the difficulty in that is for people like myself, plan ahead.
So, if you, say, we'll just use an arbitrary percentage scale. Say 100% would be maximum capacity, and you're like, maximum capacity of your current setup is exceeded on Sunday mornings. Like, man, we operate at 105% on Sunday mornings. For the rest of the time, you operate at 5%.
Yeah.
We'll just spread it out. Don't buy equipment to account for that that top 5% one day a week, when you could, like you said, plan ahead. And
for one thing, it's harder on the equipment. If you are gentle with your equipment, it will last longer. And anything you can stretch out its effective lifespan, the better investment it becomes.
Right, your ROI.
Now,
better.
Granted, here in our situation, we have an AV set up that lots of, I think, much larger congregations would envy. But we're able to do that because we take advantage of, I think, every bit of internal expertise, knowledge, and skill that we can. We're not having to farm out anything.
When that goes back, like you said, be honest with yourself. It's very easy to watch something online and go, we should have that type of stream. And if who you're watching is some big mega church, understand they're operating at a capacity that you can't, right? And I don't mean that negatively towards smaller churches, just it's very easy to watch broadcast television or a big church live stream or whatever and go, that's the standard. It's like, well, that's the standard if you have 10,000 members. That's not the standard if you have 100 members. It's a different, you're playing in a whole different ball game.
But you can do things, you can do certain things, just do them right. For example, large church, built in the 1924. So the sound system, while it had been upgraded a couple of times, was still old and antiquated, and nothing in terms of the sound gear was where it should have been. It's not hard to put your soundboard in the correct location. You may have to rerun some wiring, and you may have to find some people that will crawl under floors or between the rafters. But if you put it in the right position, it's going to work a lot more effectively for you than if you don't. And you can have a much better, like I said, hate using non-church language, but you'll have a much better product that you can take advantage of and leave the best impression of what you're trying to accomplish that you possibly can.
I agree.
I've worked with churches, and to get them to think in terms, for a long time, everyone used evangelism as the language for church growth. And while that is scripturally effective, socially it's not so much. Went through a period where that became associated with going around knocking on doors on Saturday mornings, disturbing a whole bunch of people that didn't want to be disturbed. And I started trying to get my congregations to just simply think in terms of marketing. And what is marketing other than communicating a message effectively about what you want people to notice. Then they began to see it in a context which made sense to them as to how to, quote unquote, sell the church.
Right. People don't like that term, but
They hate the term, and it is borderline offensive, but then again, you have to do something to communicate to people what your church is, what it has to offer, how it will enable you to lean into and to live out your experience of the gospel.
when I'm sure you have heard this, I've heard people say, well, people have told us our church is the best kept secret in town, or something to that effect, right? Which is very cliche, but I mean, you know, it's great. You know, some of the things we talked about on previous episodes and things about being open and accepting and this and that and whatever, and it's great to be all those things, but if nobody knows those things, then it's not really relevant, you know?
And I've tried to communicate to people when you've been told it's the best kept secret in town, that should not be a point of pride.
Yeah, no, that's not a good thing.
That's not a good thing.
But, you know, it doesn't really mean anything to stand around and be like, we do all of this stuff, but nobody knows, you know.
Yeah.
Nobody knows that you're open and accepting and welcoming to everybody and, you know, all of this sort of thing. Unfortunately, a lot of times the voices that can be very destructive are also the ones who have the ability to be the loudest.
Yeah.
And so for the voices that are less destructive, maybe becoming comfortable with being a loud, non-destructive voice can be a good thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but...
yeah, it does. I know that one thing I've always tried to do in all congregations is create some form of study, Bible study, book study, something. The congregants, the members of the congregation, generally like it. It gives you a point of reference to which you can invite people to come. It's not asking them to make a commitment to the larger church. Generally, the studies that I lead are 6 weeks or so. So you're not asking them to commit a 2-year block of time. Just come, join with us, fellowship with us. We'll go through this. And at the end, we'll turn it over and probably turn over to the class members and what have you. Take advantage of your human resources, your people. A lot of people in churches have accrued a lot of wisdom and knowledge. Allow them to share it.
And emphasize, a lot of people will hesitate on that, like the business stuff, because they think the church operates differently. You know, they think, oh, my wisdom may not be applicable here or whatever, and that's not true.
Yeah.
A lot of times the church needs the influence of outside people with outside perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking about those studies, it's time for me to go prepare for them.
Time to go get ready for Bible study.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, I've enjoyed sitting down and sharing with you about these things. It's always a good mental gymnastics exercise for me to go through these things.
Well, if you have any other questions, I don't know that we have the answer, but we might, if we don't, we might can find it for you about different ideas for kind of slimming and trimming or creatively generating revenue or different ways that you can accomplish things. Certainly put those down in the comments or email us, and we can see if we can try to help you with that.
Absolutely. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever. God bless.